Thank you so much for being here. My name is Matthew Betson, and today we're going to talk about understanding students with ADHD and the research-based strategies that we have to help them academically and help them in the classroom and even outside of the classroom. That's the end goal here. So hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll have some ideas you'll have a better understanding of what ADHD is first off, but some understanding of the tools that we can use and how we can collaborate, how we can structure our teaching to help them the best. So ADHD is just one of the most researched and well documented childhood conditions that really is out there. The DSM-5 hits it and says that it's an ongoing pattern of inattention or hyperactivity and impulsivity that interferes with everyday functioning. So which kind of sounds contradictory sometimes, but it's important to know that students fall into one of three main categories or types of ADHD: the inattentive type, which is like the distracted or the daydreamy type, and there's the hyperactive, impulsive type, and that often fidgets or blurts out or acts without thinking, acts impulsively. And then many students will show a combination of both types, and it's the combined type or a mix of both. So it's important to remember that ADHD doesn't mean a student can't focus. Um, Really, in fact, these students are often hyper focused on activities that interest them. Could be like building Legos or something. But the challenge is regulating that focus and switching it intentionally. So, which is a problem, as you might imagine, in the classroom. Also, ADHD isn't about motivation or effort, it's about how our brain manages attention and self control. So, our job as educators is really to understand that difference and then build environments that set students up for success, which we're going to cover in just a moment. So, researchers agree that ADHD is not really caused by like poor parenting or sugar or too much screen time, as it's sometimes thought. Though those things may have an impact or can make symptoms worse, really the science shows that ADHD is neurological and it's often hereditary. So, thanks to brain imaging, we've seen that areas responsible for attention and impulse control are less active or develop more slowly in those with ADHD. There's also environmental factors like smoking or alcohol use during pregnancy, for example, that can increase risk, but the main causes seem to be biological. When it comes to diagnosis, though, remember that only medical professionals can make that call. We play an important role by documenting, as teachers, we play an important role by documenting behaviors and sharing observations with parents and the school team. Um, but it is not our job to diagnose, and we should never make diagnoses ourselves, especially, and we should never ever communicate that to parents that we make a diagnosis because we are not qualified. That is not our job. Once diagnosed, though, students may qualify for services through the IDEA Act under like other health impairments or things of that nature. Our responsibility, though, is to understand how to adapt um, instruction and expectations based on what we know about ADHD, but really not to label or diagnose. I can't stress that enough. So, let's talk about how ADHD actually shows up in the classroom because it isn't like the same for every student. As we saw, there was three types of ADHD. But what does it look like in the classroom, and how can you tell if it's ADHD that's presenting itself? Well, we need to remember that at the heart of ADHD is a problem with what psychologists call the executive function. We can think of the executive function as the brain's management system. It controls things like memory and organization, also emotional regulation. It's kind of like the internal monologue or the self talk that goes on in the brain. And that internal voice, it usually reminds us of what to do next. So, students with ADHD have a wonky management system, have a wonky executive function, and they may lose focus mid task, they may forget directions, or have trouble getting started because of this deficiency with this executive function. In academics, that can be really harmful. That might mean they miss key details in reading, they could skip steps in math, which we know is pretty catastrophic for doing math, or they could forget to do homework, for example, or forget to take it home, even. So sometimes students with ADHD would even forget they would do their homework They would take the trouble or take the time to take it home to do it, but just not remember to turn it in the next day, and then it hurts them academically, even though they did the work. So socially, these students can also feel like isolated. It can also cause these social problems. They might blurt things out, for example, or interrupt or seem bossy, and it's not always because they want to be rude, um, but their impulse control related to this executive function being a little off is it's difficult for them to control that. So over time, we need to remember that repeated corrections can chip away at these students' confidence and can make them feel even picked on sometimes. Um, that's why we need to understand the why behind that behavior. If it's because of ADHD, we need to respond in a different way than just repeated corrections, because that might not be helping and it could actually hurt them socially and hurt their self-esteem and all of that. So it helps to respond with like a patient strategy, instead of frustration at all costs, even though it can be difficult to do that at times. That's what we should strive to do. So structure is one of the most powerful interventions for students with ADHD that we have. Students thrive when expectations are clear and consistent. We really need to keep the classroom rules like short and visible. Um, Short so that they are easily remembered, and visible so that it's constantly there. We can always, all of our students can constantly reference back to our rules, and it even helps the teachers to instill those rules if the teachers have trouble themselves, making sure that they're consistent with the rules. It's just great to have them visible and brief so that we can all remember them easier. It's really important that we use specific praise. So instead of like "good job" or "nice try" or "way to go," be specific with what the behavior was that is eliciting this response from you, this reward or this praise. Like, I like how you started your work right away. I like how you transitioned quietly. I like how you put your materials away in the right spot. I like how you're preparing for the next assignment before I even have said anything. These kind of like concrete acknowledgments will help reinforce what like the success looks like, the success that we want in our classroom. Um, Moving on to movement. So movement is not the enemy necessarily. We can think of students with ADHD as sometimes having to fidget or bounce their leg or move around, and it causes noises, it's distracting, and it kind of aggravates teachers sometimes. But we need to remember that movement can be co-opted. We can use movement to our benefit to help us as teachers and also to help the students with ADHD. How we can do that is to structure more movement into our instruction. So having students with ADHD be the paper passer outers is great. Having stand-up workstations or stand-up centers, so these students can just sort of like shift their weight or bounce their leg in a way that's not as distracting is great. Any type of movement we can incorporate into our students' routines, especially those with ADHD, is going to be helpful to them to get them to focus and to get that energy out of them. When misbehavior does occur, though, we really need to remember to respond calmly and clearly. We can't, give them the sarcastic or the vague reminders. Even though we're frustrated, it's important that we use our executive function to suppress that and do what we know is best for them. Instead, we need to say things that are positive and kind and to the point, and remember to be clear about what it is that we expect. The actual behavior that is the key to success is what needs to be communicated to these students. This is all about structure. It's not about control. We want them to know that this is a loving environment, but it needs to be a structured environment for us all to be successful. So moving on to instructional and environmental supports, this is really the backbone of academic success for students with ADHD. It's right up there with structure. It's instructionally, we need to remember that we need to break these large tasks into smaller, manageable pieces. No longer the paragraph direction set. No longer the giant worksheet of math facts to do. We need to chunk our work down so it's more manageable. When these students with ADHD see, and even just your students without ADHD, when they see these large assignments or these large direction sets, it is hard for them to overcome that mountain. That is like a chore for them to do. So chunking our directions, chunking our assignments into smaller bite-sized pieces, it's going to lead to happier students all around, but especially those with ADHD. So for reading, we could try shorter passages with quick comprehension checks. That might work. In math, you can break down those big math fact worksheets into smaller sections and just give them sections at a time. Um, those things would help. Just those things alone would help massively for getting students to stay engaged with our assignments. But it's also important to teach self-regulation tools explicitly. Teach them the skills that they need to achieve success. These executive function skills that many of us take for granted or have just naturally, like using timers or planning checklists, or even things like mindfulness, breathing exercises before transitions can help out and get these students to be back on track and to focus. On the environmental side, though, we need to aim for calm and predictable and as the least distracting environments as we can manage. So keeping the classroom visually clean, limiting clutter, keeping things orderly, it's going to just reduce those distractions. It's going to reduce the students with ADHD's ability to be distracted by things. We just want to make things as calm and clear and as peaceful as possible, so that there are no opportunities to easily wander off. Um, it's just important to remember that small investment in structure really pays off to more focus, fewer meltdowns, and a smoother lesson for everyone. So it's important to remember that families are our partners in this process. They are there. We can collaborate with them to help the situation, and that is the way it should be done. Many parents of children with ADHD have heard for years, criticism and blame, but approaching these conversations with empathy and professionalism really makes a huge difference to them. And once they see that from you, then they're so much more open, in my experience, to meet you halfway, to help you out as a teacher, so that we can all help out the student, which is the end goal here. So sharing small specific strategies that work at school, like things like visual checklists or reward systems, and maybe some of these don't actually work, but just sharing the ones that do work with the families can encourage the similar structure at home. And if we have consistency between school and home, that thing, it's going to make a massive difference for students. Um, so regarding medication, it's pretty controversial, but it is one of the most common and effective interventions when it comes down to it. Especially if it's paired with behavioral and academic supports. Our role is, remember, as teachers, is not to suggest or manage medication, just as it's not to diagnose. But we can observe and communicate patterns that we notice when it comes to medication. So if you ever see sudden changes in focus, like mood or appetite, we need to document these and share them with administration, share them with nurses, share them with the parents. Maybe a quick note home, like I've noticed he's more tired this week, or I noticed she's not as focused this week, can help families coordinate that care and can get the students the medication that they need, or off the medications that maybe not be helping. We can help in this process. That is really our job, but it's not to diagnose, and it's certainly not to make recommendations ourselves. So as for some quick actionable steps to make in the classroom that you can make tomorrow if you wanted to, start lessons by clearly stating what the students will learn, and then what materials they need and how long each part's going to take. This is going to help those students manage their time and manage their expectations of what's going to happen next, so it's easier for them to focus. During instruction, chunk the content into smaller bursts, like giving frequent chances to respond and circulate with short verbal praise. That's going to be massively helpful. Before transitions, give a 5-minute warning, as we mentioned earlier, and use visual timers or color-coded folders, any assignments, any way to make the day more organized, more structured, more predictable is going to be better for these students. The idea is to make this the invisible structure visible. So remove guesswork and replace it with clarity. Even small, consistent habits like this reduce off-task behavior dramatically. Thank you so much for taking the time to go through this presentation with me. I hope you have a great day, and I hope you can use what you learned for this presentation to help you out and help out your students.